Sadly, crimes go undetected every day, with many cold cases still waiting to be solved. Every now and then, the authorities get a lucky break which leads to the truth finally coming out. When it comes to lucky breaks, the one that exposed 2 serial killers in California may be the luckiest yet. Welcome back to Twisted Minds. My name is James, and today we look into the sickening case of the Boneyard Killers. 2 men responsible for one of the most grisly crime scene investigations ever seen in the United States. This vile case began with a simple shoplifting arrest that led police to one of the most shocking discoveries ever made by law enforcement. When police began poking around the home of Leonard Thomas Lake and Charles Ng, they discovered 40 pounds of bones and 5 intact bodies buried on the property. If that's not bad enough, it was the things the pair did to the poor victims that will really turn your stomach. Before we get into the meat of this story, we first need to take a look back at the early lives of these 2 killers. Leonard Lake was born in San Francisco, California on October 29, 1945. When he was young, his parents got a divorce, which resulted in him and his siblings living with their grandparents. At a young age, he began taking nude photos of his sisters, a deviancy that evolved into a twisted obsession with pornography. He would also get a kick out of killing mice, using chemicals to melt them. In 1965, age 19, Lake joined the US Marine Corps and did service in Vietnam as a radar operator. During his first tour of the war, Lake ended up in the hospital after showing incipient psychotic reactions, but was unbelievably cleared for duty shortly after. In 1971, he left the Army through a medical discharge after being diagnosed with schizophrenia. After returning to home soil, he moved to San Jose, California, and attended San Jose University, but dropped out after the first semester to join a hippie community. Eventually, Lake became paranoid and obsessed with the idea of a nuclear war that would end the entire world. This led to him becoming an extreme survivalist who always kept guns nearby in case they were ever needed. In 1981, Lake married a teacher's assistant called Clara Lynn Balaj, who he affectionately nicknamed Cricket. Eventually, Clara Lynn left him after Lake insisted she take part in amateur porn movies with him. In fact, this wasn't a new deviancy for the man, as he was married before in 1975 while serving in Vietnam, but was soon divorced after his sick fantasies came to the surface. It was shortly after his second marriage that he met his accomplice in crime, Charles Ng. So, who was Charles Ng? Well, he was born on Christmas Eve, 1960. His father was a business executive who was incredibly strict. If Ng stepped out of line, he would be disciplined with physical beatings. From a young age, Ng became obsessed with martial arts, setting fires, and theft. At the age of 15, he was arrested for shoplifting and sent to a private boarding school in England in an attempt to reform him. Unfortunately, he was expelled for stealing from another student and was sent back to Hong Kong. As an adult, Ng moved to the United States and was enrolled in Notre Dame University in California, but dropped out after his first semester, just like his friend, Leonard Thomas Lake. In October 1979, Charles Ng was arrested for a hit and run and was forced to pay the damages. In 1980, he joined the United States Marine Corps after lying about his nationality, and then was dishonorably discharged for stealing $11,000 worth of guns from a Marine Corps base. Although the ex-soldier was sentenced to 14 years behind bars, he managed to escape and fled to California. It was here that he met a man who would change his life for the worst, Leonard Thomas Lake. Soon after, the 2 became best buddies, and Ng moved onto Lake's ranch. Lake and Ng were both arrested in 1982 by the FBI for a number of firearms violations. While Lake made bail and went into hiding at the ranch owned by his ex-wife, Ng served 3 years before returning to the ranch. Within that time, Lake's obsession with a global nuclear attack went, well, nuclear. He began turning the ranch into a survivalist enclosure designed to protect them from bomb attacks and a place to repopulate the human race if it came to it. This is when the unspeakable crimes began, with Lake and Ng abducting, torturing, and killing people, most of whom were women. In fact, it would come to light that the pair had killed entire families during their murderous spree. They knew many of their victims one way or another. For example, victim Michael Carroll was a drug leader who shared a cell with Ng, while victim Donald Lake was Leonard's younger brother. The depths of depravity that those two reached sound like a plot from Dexter. But the sad truth is that these two went undetected for years while performing the worst acts you could do to a fellow human. After years of kidnapping, sexual crimes, and murder, the two men's vile deeds came to light, but in a way you probably didn't see coming. On June 2nd, 1985, Charles Ng was caught shoplifting a vice from a hardware store in South San Francisco. After returning to Lake's home and telling his friend what he had done, Lake quickly drove to the store and tried to pay for the hardware, but he was too late. The police were already on the scene. Officers noticed that Lake looked nothing like the photograph on his driver's license, which carried the name Robin Scott Stapley, a San Diego man who went missing several weeks earlier without a trace. Not the smartest move to do after abducting and killing a man. Although that was suspicious enough, Lake was arrested for the gun he kept in his trunk, which had a prohibited silencer attached to it. Once in police custody, a fingerprint search identified him as Leonard Thomas Lake. While this monster was behind bars, the story takes yet another turn as Lake swallowed cyanide pills that he had sewn into his clothes in the event of him being caught by the enemy. Again, a crazed thought born from a survivalist mentality. He died in agony 4 days later. While police continued their investigation, they discovered that the license plate on Lake's car was registered to him, but the Honda itself was registered to a Paul Cosner, another man who had disappeared from San Francisco in November 1984. Lake's registration led detectives to the ranch, still owned by Lake's ex, where they discovered the truck of missing man Robin Scott Stapley and the car of a missing woman named Lonnie Bond. After some more digging, police discovered the dungeon inside the bunker built by Lake where the victims would be kept, tortured, taken sexual advantage of before their execution. They also discovered a makeshift burial site nearby where the police dug up roughly 40 pounds of buried, burned, and crushed human bone fragments that were believed to have come from at least 11 bodies. The detectives couldn't quite believe what they had stumbled upon, with their minds instantly going to the same chilling question: how many more victims were buried at the ranch? I can't imagine the reaction of the police in that moment. Being called for a simple shoplifting and then lifting hundreds of bones from a mass burial site. Two of the bodies were later identified as Lonnie Bond and Robin Scott Stapley. Both victims had been killed the same way, by being gagged and shot in the head. As the investigation continued, police discovered a hand-drawn treasure map, leading them to two buried buckets filled with ID papers and personal possessions belonging to their many victims. With the number of individuals identified from the bucket, it is believed that the victim count could be as high as 25 people, although not all their remains were found. In the other bucket, detectives found Lake's journals that were dated between 1983 and 1984, and two videotapes titled M Ladies, which documented the sickening torture of Brenda O'Connor, who was Lake's neighbor, and Deborah Dubbs. In one of these takes, Ng is heard saying, "You can cry and stuff, like the rest of them, but it won't do any good. We are pretty cold-hearted," so to speak. It was because of these tapes that police knew Ng was fully on board with the crimes. One of the most heartbreaking things recorded by the pair was Brenda pleading not to keep her baby from her, and Ng telling the poor woman that the baby would be better off dead. Using these videotapes, the police were able to identify a 24-year-old man named Clifford Parento. Clifford had gone missing after winning $400 in a Super Bowl pool, and had been last seen leaving the bar with Ng to celebrate the win. This wasn't a chance meeting, however, as Clifford Parento had worked with Ng at a moving company, as did 25-year-old Jeff Gerald, who also disappeared without a trace. To give you an idea of Lake's warped mind, I'll share with you a few things he mentioned in his journal. For example, he wrote, "God meant women for cooking, cleaning house, and sex. And when they are not in use, they should be locked up. And if you love something, let it go. If it doesn't come back, hunt it down and kill it." Also, in the telling diaries, Lake kept referencing a motel called the Pink Palace. This was the location where missing person Randy Jacobson had stayed, as well as two other victims, 26-year-old Cheryl Okro and 38-year-old Maurice Walk, whose remains were found next to the bunker where Lake and Ng would keep and torture their victims. After a lengthy investigation, the police were able to identify 12 of the victims, although there were numerous other remains that couldn't be identified because the bodies had been chopped up into such little pieces. During their investigation, police questioned Lake's wife, Balaj, but she wouldn't talk until she had a deal for immunity. She claimed that she didn't know anything about the murders, but after the shoplifting incident and telling Lake about what had happened, Ng went to her house. They went back to the hardware store to see if Lake was all right, but when they saw him talking to the police, they went back to her house and waited for Lake to call them, a call that never came. After not hearing from Lake, Ng fled, eventually landing in Canada. As we know by now on this channel, a leopard never changes its spots, and Ng tried to shoplift again. Once again, the man was caught, but this time got into a struggle with a security guard who he shot in the hand. This landed Ng in jail for 4.5 years. While behind bars, detectives interviewed Ng about the murders, in which he tried to blame the whole thing on Lake, only admitting to disposing of a couple of bodies. As soon as he served his time in Canada, he was held on an extradition request from the United States for the murders in California. While waiting for Ng to serve his time in Canada, police continued to build the evidence. Ng managed to delay his trial by over 6 long years as he fired lawyers and requested his trial to be moved to another location. Ng was eventually convicted of 11 murders in 1999, 6 being men, 3 being women, and 2 being infants. Because of the lengthy trial, Ng's prosecution cost the state of California a whopping $20 million. This makes it the most expensive trial in the state's history, even more expensive than the O.J. Simpson trial. During the trial, another videotape was found at Ng's apartment that showed 2 bodies wrapped up and laid across a wheelbarrow. Both of these bodies were in rigor mortis, which caused them to stiffen up, which is a process that starts around 3 hours after death. Also during Ng's trial, they used over 200 pieces of evidence collected from the ranch, the bunker, the dungeon, and Ng's apartment to determine some of the victims' identities. Receipts for the camera used were also found in Ng's apartment, which connected him to the tapes and, by extension, the crimes committed at Lake's bunker. When Lake's ex-wife was called to testify, the defense attorney read the immunity agreement to the jury that clearly stated that she was immune to murder, attempted murder, aiding and abetting murder, theft, and receipt of stolen property. In short, no matter the role she played, she would walk away free. Because of this fact, she was barely questioned, leaving the truth about the role she played a complete mystery. Charles Ng is still waiting on death row in San Quentin State Prison, California, but could be waiting a lot longer as no executions have taken place in the state since 2006. At least it will give the serial killer more time to think about his awful acts while staring at the walls and bars of his tiny cell. It's scary to think how many more bones would have been accumulated by this murderous pair if one of them didn't get caught shoplifting. The details surrounding this case are some of the worst throughout American history. What makes it worse is how casual the 2 crazed killers operated, often kidnapping people they knew so they could act out their depraved fantasies. I mean, they even drove around in the cars of their victims, and even used their driving licenses like it was no big deal. It's unbelievable that after multiple people went missing, the police never thought about looking into Leonard Thomas Lake and the ranch he lived at. Thanks for tuning in to Twisted Minds. That was the case of the Boneyard Killers, and why don't you go ahead and click on one of the 2 videos on your screen for another one of our videos.